Helen Whitmore never thought she would be living in her son's guest room at 67. The walls were painted a pale gray with curtains that didn't quite reach the floor, and a slight draft that crept in through the old window panes. It was a lovely house by most standards, a 2-story suburban home on the east side of Asheville, with a swing set in the backyard, and neighbors who waved politely during afternoon walks. But it never felt like hers. Not really. The invitation to move in had come just days after Bob's funeral. Mark had called her the night she returned from the cemetery, his voice unusually soft. "Mom," he said, "Tracy and I were talking, and we really think it's best if you come stay with us for a while. Just until things settle down. You shouldn't be alone right now." Alone. The word felt like a bruise. She remembered sitting at the edge of her bed that night, staring at the envelope containing Bob's last insurance document. Alone, after 42 years of marriage, after raising a son who used to bring her dandelions and drawings of stick figure families with hearts over their heads. "I guess I'll come for a bit," she'd told him. That was 9 months ago. At first it was nice. Sophie, her 8-year-old granddaughter, had wrapped her arms around Helen like a vine the moment she arrived. "I missed you, Grandma," she whispered. "I'm so glad you're here." Back then, Helen thought she was helping. The house had energy mornings filled with cereal bowls clinking and Sophie's bright laughter, evenings with Tracy reheating dinner, and Mark talking on Bluetooth as he paced the hallway. Helen tried not to get in the way. She folded laundry, made casseroles, helped Sophie with spelling, and cleaned the kitchen before anyone asked. They never told her not to. But after a while, it was expected. By month 3, Tracy had stopped offering to pour her coffee. By month 5, Helen realized she hadn't seen her old church friends in weeks. "Oh, I told them you weren't feeling well," Tracy said with a quick smile. "Didn't want you to feel obligated." At month 7, the suggestion came. "Mom, have you thought about selling the old place?" Mark asked one evening while they sat on the patio, the sky glowing soft orange. "It's a lot to maintain, and the market is crazy hot right now. You could get a great price." He'd already pulled up a realtor's page on his phone. Helen stared at the photo of her living room, her couch, her fireplace, and swallowed a lump in her throat. "I suppose it makes sense," she said, though her chest tightened. The sale happened fast. Mark handled the paperwork. "Don't worry, Mom," he reassured her. "I'll deposit everything into your account." But when she checked the balance the next month, something felt off. She didn't say anything. Not yet. That morning, as she stirred oatmeal on the stove, Sophie wandered in wearing fuzzy socks and rubbing her eyes. "Grandma, can I have brown sugar today?" Helen smiled. "Of course, sweetheart. Just a little." Sophie sat at the kitchen table, coloring quietly, while Helen set the bowl in front of her. Tracy breezed in a few minutes later, heels clicking on the hard wood. "Thanks for feeding her, Helen. I've got a client meeting and Mark's already gone. Can you pick Sophie up from school today, too?" Helen nodded as usual. By the time the front door slammed shut behind Tracy, the kitchen was quiet again. Helen sat down across from Sophie, noticing the girl had drawn a picture of a house. A small one with a garden and a tree and a woman inside watering flowers. "Is that our house?" Helen asked gently. Sophie shook her head. "No, that's your house, the old one." Helen blinked. "You remember it?" "Yeah," Sophie said, chewing her spoon. "It smelled like cookies. Mommy says it was too old, but I liked it." Helen reached over and touched Sophie's hand. "I did too." That afternoon, while folding towels in the laundry room, Helen found a manila envelope marked with the name of her old bank. She wasn't snooping, it had slipped between the dryer and the cabinet. She recognized her handwriting on the return address label. Inside were transaction records from 2 months ago, funds wired from her old checking account into one with both Mark and Tracy's names. She felt a strange chill, though the dryer was warm beside her. She reread the numbers. $50,000. There was no loan agreement. No mention of repayment. Nothing. That night, after everyone went to bed, Helen sat at the kitchen table in the dark, the envelope spread before her. The moonlight caught the edge of a framed photo Mark and Tracy on their wedding day beaming. Bob had taken that photo. His hands were shaking slightly from early arthritis, but he'd refused to miss it. Helen touched the frame. "Bob," she whispered, "what would you have done?" She already knew the answer. Later, as she returned the envelope to her purse, she passed the hallway near Mark and Tracy's bedroom. Their voices were hushed, but sharp. "She's not going to fight it, Tracy. She's tired. She's barely even asking questions. Are you sure?" "What if she realizes she won't? Trust me. She'll be in Shady Pines by next month. We'll say it's best for her. Sophie's already used to not having her around much." Helen's hand froze on the banister. They planned to put her away. After all she'd done. Her heart pounded as she slipped into her room and shut the door without a sound. She sat on the bed and stared at the wall. They thought she was weak, that she didn't see, that she didn't matter. But they were wrong. So very wrong. The next morning, the kitchen was quiet except for the soft scrape of toast against the toaster's metal sides. Helen stood by the counter pouring coffee into her favorite mug, the one with faded sunflowers and a chipped rim. Outside, a gentle fog rolled over the backyard, giving the world a muted softness, as if even the sky had decided to whisper. Sophie shuffled in wearing a unicorn nightgown and dragging her bunny by one floppy ear. She climbed onto the kitchen stool, blinking sleep from her eyes. "Morning, Grandma," she murmured. Helen smiled, pouring orange juice. "Morning, sweet pea. Want eggs or oatmeal?" "Oatmeal, please, with brown sugar. 2 scoops." Helen chuckled. "That's a lot of sugar for such a small girl." Sophie giggled, then leaned in, suddenly serious. "Grandma, can I tell you a secret?" Helen paused the spoon halfway to the pot. "Always." Sophie glanced toward the hallway, then lowered her voice to a whisper. "I heard Mommy and Daddy last night. They said they're putting you in a home. Today. And they're going to take your money." The air left Helen's lungs. She set the spoon down slowly, wiped her hands on the towel, and walked to Sophie's side. Her voice was calm, even warm, as she smoothed the child's hair. "You're such a good girl for telling me, Sophie." That must have been scary to hear. Sophie nodded, her eyes wide. "Are you mad?" "No, baby. Not at you." They ate breakfast together in silence, save for Sophie's occasional hums between bites. Helen watched her, memorizing her face, the curve of her cheeks, the light in her eyes. This little girl, so innocent, had just saved her from disaster. By the time Sophie was off to school, Helen had made up her mind. She opened the hall closet, retrieved her brown leather purse, the one she used only for church and important appointments, and slipped the manila envelope of bank records inside. Then she picked up the landline and dialed. "Reynolds and Hayes Law," the receptionist chirped. "Tom Reynolds, please. Tell him it's Helen Whitmore. He'll remember me." A few minutes later, a familiar voice answered. "Helen. I didn't expect to hear from you so soon. I need to see you today. Is 11:00 too early?" There was a pause. "Are you all right? I will be. But I'm going to need your help." They met at Elm Street Cafe, the one just off Riverside, with the big windows and lemon muffins Helen liked. Tom was already seated when she arrived, dressed in a charcoal blazer and sipping black coffee. He stood as she approached. "Helen," he said, concern etched across his face. I look like a woman who's done being underestimated." She pulled out the envelope and laid it on the table like a poker player ready to call someone's bluff. Tom flipped through the document silently, his brow furrowing. "That's quite a paper trail. Did they forge your signature?" "They didn't have to," she said evenly. "I signed a few blank forms after Bob died. I trusted Mark to help settle things, I thought I was too emotional to handle it myself. Tom looked up, softening. You weren't wrong to trust your son, but you're not wrong to act now either. She sipped her tea. I want everything changed. Revoke the power of attorney. Freeze any joint accounts. Open new ones. And I need a new will. One that skips Mark and Tracy entirely. Tom nodded, already scribbling notes. And the house money. Helen's lips thinned. I want it back. He leaned in. It might not be easy. Legally, it'll depend on whether the funds were a gift or a conditional arrangement. Oh, it was conditional, she said, her eyes steely. They promised I'd have a home with them as long as I needed. If they break that promise, I want every cent. With interest. Tom nodded again. I'll make sure it's airtight. As they wrapped up, Helen reached into her purse and pulled out a small red notebook. These are all the dates I remember them using my card. Grocery runs home, repairs, even a spa day Tracy booked under my name. Tom took it with a wry smile. You're more organized than most of my clients half your age. I wasn't always, Helen said. But grief teaches you strange things, like how to spot silence that feels too rehearsed. Tom stood to leave. Give me 3 days. You'll be protected before the weekend. Helen smiled for the first time that day. Make it 2. That afternoon, Helen picked up Sophie from school. The child skipped down the sidewalk, her backpack bouncing, ponytail swaying. Did you do your secret project today, Grandma? Not all of it, Helen said with a twinkle. But we made good progress. They stopped at the corner bakery for lemon bars and walked home under golden trees. Sophie babbled about spelling words in art class, never once realizing the gravity of what had shifted in her grandmother's world. Later that night, Helen sat in the guest room packing a small canvas tote. Just the essentials. Birth certificate, insurance policy, spare keys. 2 photos of Bob and the new bank documents Tom had emailed that evening. As she zipped it closed, Sophie appeared at the door. Are you going somewhere? Grandma Helen smiled, smoothing the child's hair. Just organizing a few things. Sophie frowned. Is something wrong? No, sweetheart, she said, kneeling to meet her gaze. But sometimes grown-ups need to remind people they're not as old or helpless as they look. Sophie giggled. You're not helpless. You're Grandma. Helen kissed her forehead. Exactly. That night she stayed up reading by lamplight, pen in hand. On a fresh sheet of stationery she began her new will. To Sophie Whitmore it read, I leave everything, because she saw me when others only saw what they wanted. Helen stood at the kitchen counter, her hands moving with practiced grace. She folded the edges of the parchment paper over the seasoned roast, tucked it neatly into the Dutch oven, and slid it into the preheated oven. The scent of rosemary and garlic already filled the house. On the stove, potatoes boiled steadily, waiting to be mashed and whipped into the creamy texture Sophie loved. If this was going to be her last dinner in this house, then by God it would be one they'd remember. The table was already set, real plates, cloth napkins, and even the good wine glasses, though she'd filled them only with sparkling apple cider. Mark and Tracy never noticed the difference. She wiped her hands and checked the clock, 5:12 p.m., right on schedule. Upstairs, Sophie was reading in her room, humming quietly. Helen had told her this dinner was a little celebration. Sophie had asked what they were celebrating. New beginnings, Helen replied with a smile. At exactly 5:30, Helen heard the garage door rumble open. Tires on concrete, doors slamming, footsteps on the porch. She took a breath, smoothing her apron. The front door swung open. Mom, we're home, Mark called louder than usual. Something smells amazing, Tracy added, her voice high-pitched and cheerful. Helen turned from the stove with a serene smile. Just making your favorite. Sophie's upstairs finishing her book. Tracy slipped off her heels by the door. Mark stepped into the kitchen and peered at the roast. Wow, You really went all out. Well, Helen said, stirring the gravy gently, I thought tonight should be special. You never know when things might change. There was a pause. Tracy's hand froze halfway to the silverware drawer. What do you mean? She asked lightly. Oh, just life in general, dear, Helen said, turning back to her task. Things don't stay the same forever, do they? Dinner was served promptly at 6. Pot roast mashed potatoes, green beans with almond slivers, and fresh-baked cornbread. Helen poured apple cider into the wine glasses and raised hers. To family, she said, her voice calm and clear. Mark and Tracy exchanged brief glances, then clinked their glasses to hers. To family, they echoed. The conversation was forced stiff around the edges. Helen asked about Mark's new client, about Tracy's fitness app launch, about Sophie's school project. She complimented Tracy's new haircut, admired the centerpiece on the table. They squirmed with every kind word. Sophie, oblivious, talked about art class and how her clay turtle had lost a leg in the kiln. Helen listened intently, asking questions, nodding, laughing softly, when Sophie described trying to fix it with glue. By the time dessert came out, Helen's homemade peach cobbler, Mark had barely touched his plate. Tracy pushed food around with her fork. You've really outdone yourself, Helen. Everything tastes wonderful. Thank you, Helen said, sipping her cider. I just wanted this evening to be memorable. After Sophie had cleared her bowl and skipped upstairs for her bath, the air shifted. Mark cleared his throat. Mom, can we talk in the living room? Helen nodded, setting her napkin down. Of course. They moved into the living room. Mark and Tracy sat side by side on the couch, hands folded, faces solemn. Helen took her favorite chair by the window, the one with the soft cushion and the floral print. There was a long pause before Mark spoke. Mom, he began. Tracy and I have been talking, and we think it might be time to consider some changes. Helen tilted her head, eyes curious. Changes? You've been here almost a year now, Tracy added gently. And we've loved having you, really, but we think you might be happier in a place with more people your age, activities, medical support, that kind of thing. A community, Mark offered quickly. Not a nursing home. Shady Oaks has great reviews. It's lovely. Helen's gaze didn't waver. You've already made arrangements, haven't you? Another glance between the couple. We just wanted to explore options, Tracy said. That's all. Helen sat back, folding her hands in her lap. Silence stretched between them like a drawn wire. Then she smiled. Well, that's interesting timing. Mark blinked. What do you mean? I spent today exploring options too. She reached into her tote and pulled out her phone. Calmly, she dialed. Tom, it's Helen. Could you come in now? Yes, they're ready. She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her bag. Mark's face paled. Mom, what are you doing? Taking care of business, she said, rising to her feet. Just like you taught me. Tracy gripped Mark's arm. What is she talking about? 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Helen opened the door to Tom Reynolds' briefcase in hand, face calm and resolute. Good evening, Helen, he said warmly. Then with a polite nod, Mark. Tracy. Helen gestured to the living room. Why don't you explain what we accomplished today? Tom sat in the armchair opposite the couple, opened his briefcase, and began to speak. As of this afternoon, Helen Whitmore has revoked the power of attorney previously granted to her son. She has also transferred her assets to a separate institution under her sole name. All accounts associated with your household have been formally removed from her portfolio. Tracy gasped. That money, she gave it to us. Actually, Tom said evenly, there is no formal documentation of that. And what we do have are verbal agreements and emails in which your family promised Helen a permanent home in exchange for financial assistance. Mark stood. This is insane. Sit down, son, Helen said quietly. We both know what you've been planning. Tracy's voice cracked. Helen, please. We never. Sophie told me, Helen said, turning to her. She heard you, and I confirmed the bank transfers myself. You didn't even cover your tracks, Tom continued, flipping to a second folder. Helen has also drafted a new will. In it, the entire estate is to be held in trust for Sophie until she turns 25. Neither of you are included. Mark's jaw dropped. You can't do that. She already has, Tom said. Helen's voice was soft, almost kind. I wanted Sophie to be cared for by people who didn't see me as a checkbook. Mark's hands were shaking. You're blowing this way out of proportion. We were worried about you, that's all. Helen looked him in the eyes. You were worried about the money. You always have been. Tracy leaned forward, desperation in her voice. What about Sophie? She needs us. This will ruin her life. Helen shook her head. No. She'll be fine. She's stronger than you think. And smarter. Tom rose. I think that's everything for tonight. The court documents will arrive in 2 business days. You'll be served formally by the end of the week. Mark stepped forward, face red. You're really going through with this? Helen looked at him, her expression unreadable. I already did. It was a quiet Thursday morning when the phone rang. Helen had just settled into her armchair by the window, a cup of chamomile tea in hand, a light fleece blanket over her knees. Outside, the world was beginning to turn gold, the first signs of autumn painting the trees in warm amber tones. She glanced at the screen. Tom Reynolds. She picked up immediately. Tom, morning, Helen. I've got an update. Thought you'd want to hear this one directly. Something in his tone made her sit up straighter. What's going on? Well, Tom hesitated, then continued. Remember Frank's life insurance, the one Mark helped process after the funeral? Helen's chest tightened. Of course. We dug deeper after your bank records showed only a $500,000 deposit. That seemed off, considering Frank had told me years ago he took out a large policy, more than enough to care for you comfortably for the rest of your life. Helen swallowed. How much was it really? $2 million. The silence that followed was deafening. She finally found her voice. What? Yep. $2 million split evenly between you and a woman named Linda Morrison. Helen blinked. The name hit her like a cold gust of wind. Linda Morrison. That was Frank's secretary. Tom's voice was cautious now. Helen, you only received $500,000. Linda got her full share, $1 million. Which begs the question, where's the other $500,000 that was supposed to go to you? Helen's hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. Mark handled all the paperwork. He told me the policy was $500,000 total, and that it had already been taxed. I didn't question it. I was a mess. Tom was silent for a moment. It looks like Mark intercepted the paperwork. There's no doubt about it. He told Linda to keep quiet, too. I've spoken with her. Helen stood now, pacing the room. And she believed him. She said Mark called her shortly after the funeral, told her there was an error in the insurance payout, that she shouldn't worry, everything was being taken care of. She admitted to feeling uneasy, but she trusted your son. Helen's throat was dry. I see. There's more. Of course there is. Linda claims Frank made her a beneficiary because she was pregnant. Helen stopped mid-step. Come again, Linda says Frank wanted to provide for the child. But she miscarried before he could change the policy again. She didn't tell you because, well, I guess she didn't know what you knew. Helen sat slowly, her knees suddenly heavy. And Mark knew from the beginning. Helen's face was unreadable, but inside something shattered. Her husband had betrayed her with his secretary, Her son had known, and instead of protecting her, he'd stolen from her. $500,000. Gone. And he'd done it with the calm of a man stealing cookies from an open jar. No shame. No remorse. Only greed. She stared out the window at the world outside, still golden, still peaceful, yet suddenly so far removed from the one she knew. Tom's voice broke the silence again. We have grounds for a criminal case now. Fraud, theft, misrepresentation. It's a slam dunk. Helen didn't answer at first. When she did, her voice was low. Tom, I want to destroy him. There was no anger in her tone, just precision, like a surgeon choosing a scalpel. That weekend, Helen didn't leave her apartment. She made soup-dusted shelves, reread old journals. Her mind spun with timelines and memories questioning everything. She remembered Mark crying at Frank's funeral, holding her hand, promising to take care of everything. She remembered signing papers without reading them, trusting her son completely. She remembered Linda at the office holiday parties, polite, distant, always careful. Now it all made sense. Everything had been orchestrated. The babysitting, the manipulation, the plan to isolate her. It hadn't been spontaneous. It was the second act in a long con that started years ago. On Monday morning, she made a call. Hello? The woman's voice on the other end was cautious. Linda. This is Helen Whitmore. There was a pause. Helen, I didn't expect. I don't blame you, Helen said. You were lied to, just like me. Linda exhaled. I swear I didn't know he'd kept your half. He told me it was already split and you were too fragile to handle the details. Helen chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Apparently, grief makes you stupid. No, Linda said softly. Grief makes you trust the wrong people. There was silence again. Then Helen spoke, voice cool and deliberate. I want that money back, Linda. All of it. I already used some of it. You'll figure it out. I'm not threatening you. I'm giving you a chance to fix this before the courts get involved. I understand. Good. 3 days later, Tom called again. You're not going to believe this, he said. Linda wired the entire $500,000 to your new account this morning. Helen blinked. All of it, every cent. Apparently, her husband had no idea about the affair or the policy. She sold her car borrowed from her retirement and even took out a personal loan to cover it. Said she couldn't live with it on her conscience. Helen sat back in her chair, stunned. A strange emotion washed over her. Not relief. Not vindication. Just emptiness. She was more honest than my own son, she said quietly. Tom didn't answer. Because what could he say? Helen didn't sleep that night. Not out of fear, but from the sheer momentum of rage refined into purpose. She was no longer a widow merely surviving in her son's house. She was a woman with receipts, with clarity, and with a burning desire to set things right. At 8:00 a.m. sharp, she walked into Tom Reynolds' office in a navy blue blazer and her favorite pearl earrings. He looked up from his desk and smiled. You look ready to go to war. I am, Helen replied simply. Tom gestured to the chair across from him. Then let's make it official. By noon, the paperwork was filed. Criminal charges: fraud, financial elder abuse, insurance theft, conspiracy to defraud, civil suit, restitution of $700,000, emotional damages, unpaid labor compensation, illegal eviction pressure tactics. Tom sent the documents electronically directly to Mark's firm. Within an hour, the panic started. Helen's phone lit up with text after text. Mom, what the hell is going on? Please call me. This has gone too far. We can fix this. You don't need to get lawyers involved. She silenced the phone. That afternoon, the first reporter called. Mrs. Whitmore, my name is Kara Dunn. I'm with Channel 8 News. We received a tip about a pending case involving financial abuse. Would you be open to speaking with us?" Helen paused, then smiled. "Yes," she said. "I have a story to tell." That evening the story aired. The headline read, "Local Woman Fights Back After Son." Allegedly steals $500,000 life insurance settlement. Helen sat on her sofa watching herself on screen. She looked calm, clear, in control. I trusted him. He was my only child. And while I grieved my husband, he stole from me, she said in the interview. But this isn't just about money. It's about dignity. It's about the message we send to seniors that we're not invisible. We matter. In the final shot, Sophie was seen drawing at the kitchen table, the caption reading, "Helen now plans to leave her entire estate to her granddaughter." The phone didn't stop ringing for 2 days. Reporters, community advocates, women's rights groups, even 2 local senators. But Helen only answered one call. Grandma Sophie's voice was tiny, unsure. "Hi, sweetheart. I saw you on TV. You looked brave." Helen smiled. "Thank you, baby girl. I was scared, but sometimes you do the right thing even when you're scared." A pause. "Are you mad at Daddy?" Helen exhaled slowly. "I'm mad at what he did, but I still love him. He made a very big mistake." Sophie sniffled. "Mommy said we might have to move." "I know. And I'll help however I can, but I can't live with them again. Do you understand? I think so. Can I still come see you?" Helen's voice caught in her throat. "Always, baby. Always." 3 weeks later, the lawsuit hit court. Mark tried to play the good son. Clean suit, apologetic tone. But the evidence was too strong. Bank transfers, forged documents, deleted emails Helen had recovered from old devices. Tom presented them one by one with surgical precision. The courtroom buzzed when Linda Morrison testified. Tearfully, she described how Mark had lied to her, manipulated her guilt over the miscarriage, and made her believe Helen was too fragile to handle the truth. Then came the twist, even Helen didn't see coming. Tom stood holding a stack of records. "Your Honor, we'd like to submit additional evidence. For 18 months, the defendant not only stole money, he systematically isolated the plaintiff, restricted her communication, controlled her movements. That's not just financial abuse. That's psychological warfare." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge's face hardened. "Motion to accelerate sentencing hearing granted," Mark's lawyer whispered frantically. Mark looked like a man drowning in quicksand. He took a plea deal. 18 months in minimum security prison, 5 years probation, full restitution with interest. Jessica had to sell the house, move into a small condo, get a job at a dental clinic. Helen didn't gloat. She simply kept moving forward. She joined a support group for victims of elder abuse, spoke at city council meetings, even got invited to speak on a national podcast about late-life independence. She decorated her apartment with cheerful prints and fresh flowers, but her favorite thing Friday nights. That's when Sophie came over with her backpack, her coloring books, and her favorite cookies. They'd bake-do puzzles and sometimes just sit on the balcony watching the city lights. One night, Sophie asked Grandma, "Do you think people can change?" Helen thought about that for a long moment. "I think people can change," she said slowly. "But they have to want it, and they have to do the work. Saying sorry isn't enough." Sophie nodded thoughtfully. "I hope Daddy learns." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." It was a crisp Saturday morning in early October when Helen opened the balcony doors and let the breeze in. Her little apartment, modest, sunny, and full of plants, smelled like cinnamon rolls and fresh coffee, the kind of morning she used to dream about when she still lived with Mark and Jessica, back when she had to tiptoe around her own house. Not anymore. Now this was hers, all hers. She stood for a moment watching joggers and Riverside Park children playing on the swings. Then she heard the familiar knock. Sophie. Helen opened the door and grinned. The little girl practically jumped into her arms. "Grandma, I brought the movie and my fuzzy socks." "Perfect." Helen laughed, closing the door behind her. "I've got the popcorn ready." Saturdays had become their tradition, a sacred space where there was no court case, no lawyers, no whispers about betrayal, just a grandma and her granddaughter making pancakes, watching cartoons, and laughing until their stomachs hurt. As Sophie set up the DVD player, Helen watched her carefully. She was growing up fast. Sharper. Quieter. More thoughtful. That's what trauma does. But she was healing too. A week ago, she'd brought home a drawing from school titled My Hero. It was a crayon sketch of Helen standing on a hill holding a sword and shield. When Helen asked about it, Sophie had said, "Because you fought the bad guys. And you won." Helen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That evening, as they shared apple pie on the couch, Sophie turned to her with wide eyes. "Grandma, can I ask something hard?" "Of course, sweetheart. When Daddy gets out, will you talk to him again?" Helen paused. The question wasn't simple. Mark had written from prison twice. The first letter was defensive, blaming stress, money, even Jessica. The second was different. It was shorter, simpler. "I don't expect forgiveness. But I'm learning. I'm sorry. I'll wait as long as it takes." She hadn't responded. Not yet. But she'd kept the letter, and that mattered. "I don't know yet," Helen said honestly. "But I'm not angry anymore." "Do you still love him?" Helen smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Sophie's face. "Love doesn't disappear. It just changes. Sometimes love means stepping back, saying no more. And sometimes love means giving people space to fix what they broke." Sophie nodded slowly, like she was storing every word. Over the next few months, life settled into a new rhythm. Helen started teaching a painting class at the community center. She joined a walking club. She even tried speed dating once, but left halfway through when a retired dentist named Earl told her he didn't believe women should vote. "Nope," she muttered, grabbing her coat. "Not today." She laughed about it later with Sophie, who gasped, "Grandma, you left a date." "Darn right I did." Sophie giggled. "You're so cool. Don't you forget it." One spring morning, Helen received a letter in a cream envelope. No return address. She opened it carefully. Inside was a check for $10,000. And a note. "You were right. I wasn't as brave as you. But I'm trying now. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Linda." Helen sat with the letter for a long time. Then she wrote one back. "I accept your apology. We were both deceived. And we both loved a man who wasn't always honest. I wish you peace, Linda." Helen. She included a pressed flower and mailed it the next day. Closure. On the 1-year anniversary of the lawsuit, Helen stood in front of a small audience at the senior center, giving a talk titled, "How to Protect Yourself from Family Exploitation." Her voice was calm, steady, filled with experience, not bitterness. "Trust is a beautiful thing," she said. "But it should never be blind. Not even with your children. Love them. But protect yourself." After the talk, a woman in her 80s approached. "You gave me courage," she whispered. "I've been afraid to speak up. But after today, I'm going to call my lawyer." Helen hugged her gently. It's never too late. When Mark was released, he didn't come straight to see her. Instead, he called first. "Mom, it's me." "I know. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For not turning Sophie against me." Helen was quiet for a moment. She loves you. That's her choice. And her right. I'm working now. Community service. I'm going to therapy. I hope so. A pause. Maybe one day I can come by, just to say hi. Helen didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. Instead, she said, keep doing the work, and hung up. Months passed. Then one day on Sophie's 10th birthday, Helen got a surprise. As the kids played pin the tail on the donkey and devoured cupcakes, Mark showed up at the edge of the park, dressed simply, holding a small wrapped box. Jessica was beside him, not holding his hand, but standing with him. Helen watched as Sophie spotted her father and ran into his arms. For a moment, she saw something pure in his eyes. Regret. And love. He looked over at Helen, unsure. She nodded once. He didn't approach, but he didn't leave either. That was enough for now. Later that evening, as the party ended, Sophie sat curled on Helen's lap. This was the best birthday ever, she murmured sleepily. I'm glad, sweetheart. I think Daddy's changing. I think so too. Do you think he's sorry? I know he is. Are you proud of me? Helen's heart swelled, more than you'll ever know. Sophie smiled and drifted off to sleep. Helen looked out at the stars beginning to twinkle over Riverside Park. At 67, she had finally claimed her life, not as someone's mother, not as someone's wife, but as Helen Whitmore, a woman who had been underestimated, dismissed, used, and had risen stronger. Her legacy wouldn't be bitterness, it would be wisdom. And Sophie, always Sophie. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments.